This is an open letter to Uncle Sam. Love you, man. Regarding education, it's a great experiment that your managers, Uncle Sam, have undertaken on your land, which it was, barely working out, and suddenly this pandemic, this viral pandemic took place, and the system is showing its shortcomings. How's the education connected to the pandemic? Here's how you can look at it. What this experiment that the managers of Uncle Sam have been doing for the past, one can say, at least 50 years, 60 years, is that the system has been concentrating on producing the highest quality educated people, but in short numbers. So you have very good universities and very good higher education learning centers, which produce great results. But it's not a mass education. They don't produce great results en masse. Select few individuals who have the aptitude can reach the stratosphere, metaphoric stratosphere of education and understanding, and with all the amenities that is involved and all the technology that is applied and at hand, these select individuals in Uncle Sam's land can become very productive at the highest level of technology and industry and medicine, but they're very few. On the other hand, the managers of Uncle Sam have attracted the best minds from around the world, have literally emptied out the rest of the planet from good minds, best minds that they have, and attracted all of them with better pays and better jobs, better pays, better salaries, better living environments, safe and stable living conditions. And all this has attracted the best minds of the world in these, at the highest level of their field, in, again, technology and industry and the forefront of medicine and all of this. But again, these are few top individuals from around the world and few top individuals trained within the United States. So what has become is, the result is that the pandemic hits. These great minds and this great wealth and this great industry goes to work and produces some of the best vaccines available in the world, first and foremost and top of the line. However, because mass education has been neglected for so long, and superstition and religion has been promoted and let loose for so long, the result is the population who has to take advantage of these medicines, these top of the line medicines, are not having any. And this is as I said, this is a great experiment of the experiment is what happens if you put in the same geographical location, you produce the greatest minds, you gather from around the world the greatest minds, but you neglect the masses, mass education. So even when great minds, put great things together, the masses are reluctant to take advantage of it because the masses don't understand the difference between a virus and a bacteria. The masses don't understand, the objective of a vaccine. The masses don't understand. And on top of that, you have a, murky history of the security services and being up to no good in terms of administering poison, history of administering poison to some people. The incident with the syphilis continues, not helping the black folks with the syphilis in that experiment, and neglecting mass education, and then a murky history of using and abusing the citizens have come together and created a mess. Now, as much as the leadership says, hey, take this, it's good for you, some don't take it because they're superstitious and they're religious and they're not well educated, don't understand the preliminary things regarding science. And then some remember the bad experiments conducted on them in the history, and read and hear about how how the system has abused and neglected them, so they become suspicious. So the whole the whole system becomes a hot mess. And it just goes to show that you cannot neglect the education of the masses, because this is for example a pandemic situation. There are other situations in which the masses are easily manipulated in realms of politics, in realms of economy. The masses are easily manipulated, and it causes the masses to shoot themselves in the foot and vote for the candidate that shouldn't be trusted, vote for the ideas that are nonsensical, vote for the crazy ideas and vote for the crazy people, and with no science, not believing science, believing superstition and gods and religious scripture. When you neglect education, it's simply you're handing over your people to the shamans, the religious nutcases. When you neglect the education, the proper education of people become naive and start believing shit they shouldn't be believing in, and start believing oil salesmen, snake oil salesmen. And why has education been mass education the education of the masses has been neglected? Because it's unprofitable. It's education at the primary level and the mid level and the high school level, and this important period of life when one can when the brains are molded, when the personalities are molded, when educate real person emerges after these first few years of life, this has been neglected because capitalism believes in profits, early profit, not even long-term profit. Capitalism believes that, next quarter, what the numbers that we have to show next quarter. And primary education, early education is not profitable, does not show profits at the end of the day. And higher education only shows profits if you force people to borrow a lot of money for their education. It was a funny thing that when I mentioned to somebody that the Cuban doctors, and Cuba has produced so many doctors that they have excess of doctors, which it's something you would expect a superpower such as Uncle Sam producing excess doctors and excess engineers and exporting them around the world, which is the opposite. The superpower such as Uncle Sam is importing doctors and engineers and all the brains of the world, importing them. And a small country like Cuba which is run under capitalism, is producing excess of them and exporting them. And somebody brought it up and said, "Oh, but they are slaves. Those doctors are slaves of the state. The Cuban doctors are slaves of the state. They go abroad and they have to work for pennies, and even the pennies, most of the money goes to the government, and they get an average wage. They don't make a lot of money, and therefore they're slaves for the government." To which, the answer is very simple. What do you think the doctors are that are trained in the United States? What do you think they are? By the end of their education, they have in excess of at least $400,000 or $500,000 in student loans that they have to pay off. At the beginning of their careers, they end up with an enormous volume of student loan that they have to pay off. If you owe a lot of money and you're at this beginning of your work life, well, you're a slave. You're just not slave to the state, you're slave to the banks. Whoever financed your education, because your education was so expensive, because your university had to make a profit, had to show a profit, because it's a capitalist system. The high school can't show a profit, so they don't educate. The middle school can't show a profit, so they don't educate. The primary school can't show a profit, so they don't educate. And the only way university can show a profit, so they can educate, is if they put you under $500,000 of loans. They take money from the banks on your behalf. Here's how it works out. The university takes money from the bank on behalf of the student and makes the student in debt to the bank. Sort of like, tells the bank, yes, I want $500,000 to educate this cocksucker to become a doctor. Thank you very much. Here's my $500,000, and now you, the cocksucker who wants to be a doctor, sign that paper. Now you owe $500,000 to this bank. End of story. And that's slavery. That's, you owe $500,000 right off the bat. And then another problem rises out of that. And the problem is gentrification. The problem, it becomes that this newly graduated doctor that is ready to make a life for himself as a physician, looks at his finances and he says he's $500,000 in debt. At such point that he's $500,000 in debt, he will never think ideally as a young trained physician, would never think ideologically and say, yes, I'm going to go to, such and such a village in Oklahoma and become a physician there because they need physicians over there. Because pretty soon he realizes in such and such a village in Oklahoma, a small city in Oklahoma, he's not going to be able to pay off his $500,000 worth of debt. He's gonna see like 5 patients a day. He may have to sit with each one he can sit with each patient for an hour because there's nobody else. He can't have 500 patients a day. It's sparsely populated. He can be a good doctor. He can give proper time to his patients and get to know them and how a doctor used to be, the tribe's shaman used to be, sit down and get to know your patient. But no, that can't happen in the capitalist system because this cocksucker has to pay off $500,000 worth of debt. So he figures out, no, I'm not going to Oklahoma. I'm not even going to Oklahoma City. Forget about the villages. I'm not even going to Oklahoma City because the purchasing power of people living in Oklahoma is not as great as the purchasing power of people living in New York City. So, however expensive, I have to go and try to establish a business in one of these rich centers where rich people live and provide my services to them if I'm thinking of, paying off my debt. If I'm ever thinking of getting out of this enormous debt, financial debt. So, therefore, Oklahoma doesn't get doctors regularly. Nobody forces these doctors to go over there, and these doctors, newly trained physicians, are in debt, and they, accumulate in large cities with, large population who can pay great prices for these doctors' services. So these doctors can get out of the debt, pay off their debt to the bank. So all involved suffer. The doctors suffer, the newly trained physician suffers because of all the mental anguish that he has to bear for many years as a slave to the bank. Whether I can pay off my debt, whether I can't pay off my debt, what happens if I can't pay off my debt, all the mental anguish that goes with that. The residents of Oklahoma don't benefit because nobody bothers to go to them because their real purchasing power is not there. They can't pay exuberant prices for the physician services, and only exuberant prices can help this physician pay off his debt. All involved suffer except the bank, who has got, just a year after years, the banks get more and more slaves in their system. These are, slaves that have been paid for, bought and paid for. Now the slave has to pay off for his own freedom. Buy his own freedom by paying off the debt plus interest to the bank who owns the slave. Well, now the slave is physician. Who cares? He's a cocksucker who does a certain job. The bank owns this cocksucker because of all the debt that this cocksucker owes to the bank. So, slavery never went out of business. It's just instead of the, plantation owners, the banks are the slave owners. Those who are, have access to a lot of capital and are able to purchase slaves by financing their life, their education. They own all these slaves, all these people who now have to go out on the street and try to, rip each other apart so they can pay off the bank for their freedom, pay for their own freedom. It's a mess. Capitalism and this, capitalism that has caused slavery never to go out of business, it's a mess. Everybody loses. The young person loses. The people living in rural areas in Oklahoma lose. The people in the cities lose because not everybody in the city can afford to pay, exuberant prices for the physician services, and the physicians cannot charge less because then they wouldn't be able to pay off their debt to buy their freedom from the bank. High prices for physician services in the cities and no physicians in the rural areas. The colleges are making do. They're having a good time. They're just collecting all this money from the bank for training these people. But is all that money necessary? I read somewhere that Yale has, a reserve of $30 billion. What is this reserve? Yale University has a reserve of 30 billion with a B dollars. A college whose job is training people has this much surplus. Well, apparently it's a very profitable business to be in, teaching people shit. Yeah, I'm sorry, but the whole idea, the money is moving from the bank to the university and the student goes under debt. The money keeps moving from the bank to the universities and the student goes under debt and becomes a slave, and he has to for many years work his butt off in again providing his services to the richest people he can find. Again, the student cannot go to work in Oklahoma and get to know Oklahomans and give his time and see 5 patients in Oklahoma. No. He has to go to a large city and find the richest people he can find and provide his services to those rich people in the hopes that, he can make his debt. He can free himself from from the enslavement that he's under. It's amazing that the whole system works for the rich, built by the rich people, for the rich people. The banks and the colleges and the rich people living in the cities. The banks, the universities collect the money to train this guy, and the banks get to own new slaves every year, and then these new slaves have to go provide their services to the richest people they can find so they can pay for their freedom. So it's sort of like, it's a system built by the rich, for the rich, screw everybody else. And then they're wondering, Uncle Sam, I love you, man, but then your managers are wondering why the quality of life is diminishing in your land. Then your managers are wondering why a lot of frustrated people, why suicide rates are so high, why January 6th and January 7th and January 8th and all these insurrection and resurrection and tesurrection, and where did Trump come from, and why is it that Trump was able to put his finger on the pain button, and why was he, why so many people, accepted his what he was saying. Well, this is it. This system that is built by the rich, for the benefit of the rich, and educated or uneducated. If you're uneducated, the system uses you as a low-paid slave with minimum wage of $7-8. If you're uneducated, the rich man will use you as a low-paid slave, because it's slave wages, $7 an hour, $8 an hour, when your rent is $1,500 a month. You're literally slave. You're literally just making enough money for your food and shelter. What is that? A slave. Because with that kind of wages, you will not be able to make any more than just for you to satisfy your food and shelter. Not even healthcare, because healthcare is so expensive. Because the doctor has to pay off his enormous debt to the bank. He can't charge less than the maximum he can. Again, because he wants, as soon as possible, he wants to become free, a free man. Unless he doesn't pay his debt to the bank, he's not a free man, and he knows it. It's amazing to me. It's just amazing to me. And if you're uneducated, you're a slave with a $7-8 an hour wage. You're a slave. You're a low-paid slave to the system. The system only pays you enough for food and shelter, barely. And if you can go get educated, you become a high-paid slave for the system. You're enslaved for 10-20 years to the banks to pay off for your freedom. If you can, if you learn the right subjects that the rich man wants you to learn, so you can provide your services to the rich man. You see, the whole thing, capitalism, the whole thing is centered around the rich man. You borrow from the rich man, then you have to pay off to the rich man. Then you better study the kind of subject that the rich man wants you, needs help in, has use for. You cannot go study subjects that are good for humanity, maybe, but not very profitable. So the rich man doesn't have a fucking use for you. For example, education for primary school, middle school, high school, because it's an unprofitable business, education at that level, and the banks cannot, enslave the parents for educating their 5-year-old. So there is no profit in it. The schools cannot, borrow money from the bank and have the parents become slaves to the bank, or the 5-year-old sign a paper and become a slave to the bank. So lower level education sucks in the United States. Primary, middle, and high school. So the result is, as you can see, people who have that level of education become very religious, superstitious, stay away from vaccines, believe all kinds of nonsense. Even though the highly educated domestic people and the highly educated imported people are coming up with the best medicine, but still, the system is dysfunctional. The medicine goes unused because nobody has bothered to educate the masses. Have a good primary education, good middle school education, good high school education. Nope, it's unprofitable. Nobody touches it. If you fall within the circle of needs of the rich man, that business is a good business. You're good to go. But that's why, again, back to the school teachers. There is no profit. Nobody can get rich by becoming a school teacher in the United States, because the rich man doesn't see a profit in the school system. There is no profit to be made from a 5-year-old in the school system. Therefore, the rich people stay away from it. The wealthy, the banks, stay away from primary education, middle school education, high school education. They stay away from it. Therefore, it sucks. Therefore, nobody pays the teachers. Therefore, the best minds, the best brains stay away from primary education. Some of great minds go into the industry, some great minds go into technology, some great minds go into higher education in universities. But none of the great minds bother to go to primary education, middle education, high school education, because there's no money in it. The banks are not financing it, and the system of capitalism is based on if the rich people are willing to pay for it, finance it. And the rich people are not willing to finance mass education, even at that level, primary and middle and high school. I'm sorry, but capitalism, you can see that. And socialist Cuba produces excess of educated people, and the mother of all capitalism, or father of all capitalist system, Uncle Sam, not only can't educate enough people because not enough people are willing to go under so much debt to learn a trade, but also has to import educated people from around the world, places where they can barely afford to export their educated people. I mean, you look at Guatemala, they produce a couple of hundred doctors a year, let's say, and they probably need 200 doctors a year to satisfy the need of Guatemalans. But then Uncle Sam provides such a great environment and such open doors for educated people that of the 100 doctors that Guatemala produces every year, 50 of them move to the United States and go wherever the rich people want them to go for their services. So Guatemala cannot afford to lose any doctor, needs more doctors that it produces, but it keeps losing a few that it produces anyway to Uncle Sam. Because Uncle Sam cannot produce enough educated people of its own. Uncle Sam should be if you're a superpower, you should be, superpower in everything, including, educating enough people to be able to export around the world. But no. Can't even educate enough to satisfy the domestic need. I'm sorry, but and the pandemic just exposes the shortcomings, has exposed the shortcomings quite well. That what happens when you concentrate on education of a select few at a very high level and neglect the education of masses because it's just not profitable. Love you, Uncle Sam.